It's now been almost 2 years since I moved out to the country, and in this rather long video, I'm going to be going over the top 10 things I've learned about rural reef keeping. I've done some other videos on things like the hell of getting shipments, and power failures, and things like that. The funny thing is, if a channel like this existed prior to me moving out here, I probably wouldn't have done it. That's not to say things are all bad, there are some good things too. But I will be going over the bad things first, and the good things second, since this is a rather long video and I'm sure a lot of people won't sit through the whole thing. If you have any thoughts of moving to the country, or just want to see how other people live, I encourage you to watch the whole thing. By chance, I just got a chance to fly my dad's drone a few days ago, so there's a lot of aerial footage of my house and the surrounding area. This really shows how remote of an area it is. And then there's also some footage of my tanks. Anyways, here's the list. First, an honorable mention. This is not really that big of a deal, but people out here, and I'm sure in a lot of other rural settings, think crazy things. When I first moved in, I had my 180-gallon tank and a whole bunch of other stuff out on the side of the house, and everyone passing by could see it. And for a while there was a rumor going around that we had alligators. I have no idea how that started. I don't know what kind of alligator can fit in a 180-gallon aquarium, but that's what people thought. Now you can see the blue lights from really far away. Not that a lot of people pass by, but who knows what they think about that. Number 5. Power failures are much more common here. Where I used to live in Mississauga, it was underground power. In the, I don't know, 10 years I was in the hobby there, a little bit longer, I think there was one power failure that lasted more than an hour, and that was pretty localized. I wasn't in the hobby when there was that big blackout in 2003, so I missed that. A lot of times when there were ice storms and other places lost power, it didn't affect me. Out here though, it's a different story. To be fair, the power grid has actually been better than I expected. I think there's been probably 5 or 6 power failures lasting more than an hour in the almost 2 years I've been here. But one of those was actually 33 hours. Since I have a generator, I didn't suffer any losses, but it was a real pain to refill the generator every 11 hours. Number 4, shipping can be problematic. This is something I really wish I had known before I moved here. Where I am in Northern Ontario, it's outside of Sault Ste. Marie, which is maybe 600 to 700 kilometers from Toronto. There is a direct flight, so I thought, well, I can get shipments shipped here no problem. There's FedEx and UPS and Purelator. Shouldn't be an issue. It's an hour and 10-minute flight. Well, what I do know is in smaller communities, not just where I am, but actually in the so-called city of Sault Ste. Marie, they don't have FedEx and UPS. It's outsourced to local companies. Now, everyone has heard horror stories on FedEx and UPS, losing their fish and their coral, throwing boxes, all those videos we see around Christmas time. Well, you can imagine that a third party that they find cheaper to pay than to deliver it themselves is going to be even worse. Not to mention there are all kinds of weather delays here, and we also suspect that if not enough packages are going overnight, they don't bother to send the plane. That's just a suspicion. Who knows if it's true? Maybe they would overnight one box and take a loss, but I haven't had any luck so far. Airport to airport is really the only option, and even that, only one major airline flies here, and unfortunately most companies use the other major airline to send their airport-to-airport shipments. So while I am far, I'm not like crazy far, but it's a real challenge to get stuff shipped here. If I'd known how hard it was, I may have rethought this. Number 2, there are no fish stores here or in the general area. And I mean like a Big Al's or a general chain aquarium store that has freshwater and saltwater. There's a PetSmart, and that only has a very limited supply of freshwater fish, and they really only sell tank kits, not very many options. There's a couple of small independent pet stores too. Again, they have just a few freshwater fish and not much else. Simple supplies like an ammonia alert badge, I can't even find that here. And when I needed a 10-gallon tank, I had to go to 3 separate shops. All they had were $99 freshwater kits coming with a useless filter and light and whatever else. When I finally did find a 10-gallon tank, I ended up paying $28 for just a 10-gallon tank. That was pretty hard to swallow, but I needed it, so I had to pay it. A big reason why I have that 55-gallon frag tank is there's no 40-gallon breeders here or very many other tank sizes unless you buy the expensive kits at PetSmart that come on stands that are too small and all that kind of stuff. On the plus side, it has kind of stopped me from setting up a freshwater tank, which I probably would do if there was a little bit better freshwater selection here. Number 1, and this is no surprise, there are no reef stores here. None within 3 hours. I knew this going in, but I didn't realize how hard it would be to go without them. For many years, I've gone to the reef shops almost every week, or at least, within a couple of months I would have gone a couple of times. I know a lot of people watching this probably order most of their fish and coral online, but going to the store, it's so much more fun. Getting to see them in person, getting surprised at what you see. The first time I saw a chambered nautilus, it was not at a public aquarium, it was at a reef store. The first time I saw a gem tang, dozens of different kinds of angels, like my former masked swallowtail angels, clarion angels, bandits, other ones that are in the thousands of dollars, all that kind of stuff. Not to mention every kind of coral you can imagine, from the good old days when giant wild acro colonies would come in and hundreds of clams, to huge Australian shipments of every color of the rainbow of micromusa. I figured, well, I'll still go to the store a couple times a year and that kind of thing, but I mean, if you're not at the store when a new shipment comes in, you don't know what they're going to have. They might have 500 new corals, they might have nothing new. If someone gets a shipment in, I can't just drop everything and go like I used to. I didn't think it would be this hard, but to be honest, I even miss the smell of reef stores. There are, of course, some good things about rural reef keeping, and normally I would do the good news first and the bad news second, but as I said, if someone's going to watch this and not watch the whole thing, best they hear the bad news, and the good news isn't as important. Not in this case anyways. First, an honorable mention. The few people who have come to see my tank have been really impressed with it. I'm not trying to brag or anything, but they're just like, wow, you have this nice reef. I didn't know you could keep this. Is this salt water? Those kind of questions that your family probably ask you. And also for the few local reefers who didn't have the benefit of going to stores and getting an education through other people just with the internet. They can kind of see it in person and realize, oh, this is how that works, or this is why I do this. So it's pretty cool to show the tank off, not that it happens very often. Number 5, I have lots of time for my tank. Again, I'm not really a social person. It's not like me and my wife or me and my friends would go out Friday nights most nights. I did do things more, but now I've got lots of time for the tank. I also work from home, so I think I've missed one water change in my weekly water changes since I moved out here. I generally notice when something is starting to go bad, either right when it starts or early, thanks to the fact that I'm always testing. Of course, I did this kind of stuff before too, but there were obviously more times where it'd be like, oh, I'm going to go to the Blue Jay game or a concert or whatever, and neglect the tank for a couple of days. Generally, I've been pretty good on this before, but now I'm pretty much bang on for everything. Number 4, there is little to no local disease. I do still quarantine everything, and it wouldn't surprise me that a lot of tanks here, just like everywhere else, would have ick. But as far as other problems like macro-eating flatworms or something more serious, it's very unlikely that I'm going to find that here. It's because people are not adding stuff to their tank very often, and when they are adding it, it's just from other locals. So you're not having new shipments come directly from the ocean week after week and people adding things in and who knows what's in it. Again, other than ick, I wouldn't worry too much. Although I would still quarantine just to be safe. But I don't think you have to worry too much about pests out here with the few reefers there are. Number 3, and this is specific to my situation, although I'm sure that this varies. Water quality is very high here. I'm on a well, and I don't know anything about wells. It's an artesian well, if you know what that means, but the TDS coming out of the well usually varies from about 50 to 55. My old city water was more like 150, 175. And a DI cartridge will basically last me the entire year, making 30 gallons a week or more. The water is, I guess, a little bit harder, but the sediment filter I change 3 or 4 times a year, and the carbon block maybe twice. Also, I have no water bill, so I can make as much as I want. Number 2, power failures are not hard to deal with out here. Yeah, they happen a lot more frequently, but it's no big deal to set up your generator. I know a few of my friends have mentioned that they would get a lot of help from their neighbors if they were running loud generators 24 hours when there's a power failure. My neighbors here are pretty far away. I would guess they're maybe 500 and 1,000 feet from my house, the 2 closest houses, but they would probably have generators going too for their freezer and other things. I do have a newer, kind of quieter generator, but if I had an old rickety one, I could run it here and no one's going to say anything. Also, everybody has gas cans and that kind of thing, so it's not too big of a deal to get more gas. Of course, gas stations are not open 24 hours here, so it's good to always have at least a day of gas on hand. And the number one good thing about rural reef keeping, which should apply everywhere, but it especially applies here, is I appreciate what I have and not what I can add. There was a time where I'd always be waiting for new shipments to come in, wanting to add a certain coral or a certain fish, and oh, this has got to go there, or I really need to get this guy. I have very few opportunities to add new things here, so I treasure all the fish and coral I have. Some of them I've had for more than 10 years, and I've got to see them grow, I've got to see them do good and bad, and then good again. And I'm really happy with the corals I have now. When I first started this channel, I called my tank, which ended up being the channel name, Average Reef. That's because I used to have a lot of nicer stuff, and there's no denying that now. I still had like my masked swallowtail angels, Achilles tang, wrasses, a lot more really colorful Australian micromusa, and all kinds of other corals that I don't have anymore. Some of those died years ago, some of those died while I moved. What survived was the hardier stuff mostly, and I ended up with basically an average reef, which is why I called it Average Reef. Even my tank size downgraded. But now, almost 2 years later, most of what I have is thriving. There's still been a few setbacks, and a few things are not doing the greatest, but I would say 90% of things are doing great. They're growing and thriving, and I'm very happy with my tank. I would go as far as to say it's no longer an average reef. I'm not saying that to brag, but it's looking really good, it's looking really mature, and it will be interesting to see where things go from here. I don't have any plans to upgrade, not for a few years. I don't know if I'm gonna live here forever or if I will move back to a more city life. It's hard to say. I'm not looking too far into the future for now, which is why I don't want to make any drastic changes. I'm just gonna enjoy what I have for now and see what happens. I hope this was at least a little bit entertaining for people. I'm sure a lot of these things people would never consider. There probably is a reason other than fish keeping why most people from the city never move to the country, but I'm not going to get into that on this channel. This is just about fish stuff. So I hope you enjoyed this, and happy reefing.